All right, we're talking with Michael Drew with promoteabook.com and Book Retreat. Michael, you got a pretty cool entrepreneur story. You've pretty much been an entrepreneur your whole life and been in the book business your whole life. So before we get to talking about what you're doing nowadays, take us back and tell us your entrepreneurial journey.
Well, it's interesting actually. My entrepreneurial journey, in part, goes back impacts my journey in book publishing. In full transparency, my grandfather, my mother's father, was the dean of the library science school at Brigham Young University. He brought the accreditation for that to the university, and my father was a professor of literature at BYU as well. And my mother got her degree in library science. So books have kind of been in my family since before I was born. So
Yeah.
that kind of influences what I've done. I think it fair to state that I am a high school dropout, right? And so what I've done has been based on my going to the school of hard knocks and pulling up my pants and getting and my sleeves and getting to work. Um, I come from a large poor Mormon family out of Provo, Utah, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom when I was growing up, and my dad was a teacher and a professor at the university with 8 kids. So we didn't have a lot of money to be able to take care of us all in the way that I would have preferred. So when I was 9, we went to the LDS equivalent of the Salvation Army, which is called Desert Industries, owned by the LDS Church, and to get clothes for the new school year. And I didn't really like that. I wanted new clothes. I didn't like, I didn't want to get made fun of and all those other things. And so I said, I gotta, if I'm going to get new school clothes, I'm going to have to do it myself. And so what I decided to do was to go knock on college student dorm doors and offer to clean their dorms or their apartments, or for the guys to do singing telegrams to the girls, or that kind of a thing. And what I discovered was that even back then, and we're talking about back in the mid to late 80s, that uh, college students were lazy, but were willing to spend a premium to be able to not have to clean and do other things. And so I was able to go in and take out the trash and do dishes and mop floors and vacuum. And I ended up averaging about $250 an hour in services. And so after doing that for about 3 months, I decided that I wanted to get other kids involved because I was good at sales. So let me just do the selling and then have other kids go in and do the work. And so we probably made between the time I was 9 to about 14, 15, 250 to $350,000. I say that, and we spent it. So I didn't track it. I didn't pay taxes. I just went out or it was cash, right?
Yeah.
And so, but we earned a lot of money, and I learned that entrepreneurial spirit in doing that, and the need for sales. And so that kind of started off my career. It also started me with, at least back then, with the belief that if I wanted something, I had to go and do it myself. Now, one of the things that I've learned working with various clients, and all of my clients are entrepreneurs and business owners in some degree or another, is that we're all broken in some capacity. Like we've all gone through some trauma, big T or little t trauma, that influences our thought process and what we're doing. So we're often trying to prove or disprove something to somebody, and that's a major driver. And for me, it was um, proving to my dad that I was worthy and that I deserved his affection and attention. You could probably appreciate that when I'm bringing in more money than my father is into the home, and I'm doing, I'm doing things to better take care of the family in terms of food and other bills, that probably builds resentment with parents. I can appreciate
Yeah.
why the Hollywood kids have their parents who end up taking advantage of their money because there's a certain level of resentment, I think, that goes with that. And certainly that happened with my father. And so it ended up, my father was a convert to the LDS Church, and he was a member of he was a part of the Air Force for a number of years. And so he applied a fairly rigid and methodical application to the LDS theology and faith. And so it was pretty black and white. And what I can tell you is that my dad is methodical from a psychological standpoint, and me as a competitive from a psychological standpoint. We saw the world in very different ways. He expected the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and I'm like, I want to go get that thing. I'm going to go figure it out and make it happen. And what are rules? Like rules can they support me getting there or not? Right? Like, fine line between entrepreneurship and being a criminal, but really it was, goal and the way to the goal. And it was actually something that my father taught me, was this ideology of goal and the way to the goal. So in part he is to blame for my thought process there. And so um, when I was 15, my dad left my family, and um, I just kind of had learned through my life that if I wanted anything, wanted to take care of myself, it was really up to me. So that's what I did, and I got in with some bad people, and decided I liked girls more than school and other things, and met a girl and decided to move with her as a 17-year-old up to between Bellingham, Washington, and Seattle, Washington, and sold drugs and did other things while I was up there, and was there for about a year, and determined that while I was there that it really wasn't the lifestyle that I wanted. Like I wasn't there because I was kicked out of home. I wasn't there because there was some major problem or whatever. I just chose that as my action. So I'm like, let's go back home. So I went back home to my mom's and moved in, and fairly shortly thereafter, I got a job as the manager at a Burger King. Went from a shift manager to the location manager. And then I met a young lady, and we dated. She was a BYU student. I got married to her, and she said, Mike, you're too smart to manage a Burger King. You've got to go get a different job. So she helped me find a job at a magazine called Executive Excellence. Now, Executive Excellence was a division of the Covey Leadership Center before it merged with Franklin and became Franklin Covey.
Mm.
And of course, Stephen R. Covey is most well known for his book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Right. And so, but back then it was the Covey Leadership Center, and the Executive Excellence magazine was a division of that overall company. And I went in and became a salesperson for the magazine. And I became the number 3 salesperson within the organization, which is only significant because the then number 1, 2, and then 4 and 5 salespeople had all been there for 5 or more years, and they were just renewing old subscriptions and sales that they had done. So I came in and was generating all these new sales. And so at that same time, the merger between Franklin and Covey occurred. And Ken Shelton, the executive editor of the magazine, was given the magazine as a thank you and payment by Stephen R. Covey for his ghostwriting and editing of Seven Habits of Highly Effective People.
Huh.
And so at that time, Ken came to me, and I was, 18 and a half. And he's like, hey, Mike, you're doing a really good job selling our magazines. But, in our magazines, we publish all of these amazing authors. Why don't we start publishing their books? And as a young, naive 18 and a half year old, I'm like, sure, I can do that. Like, that sounds like a lot of fun. And so that's what I did. I went out and I helped Executive Excellence set up their book publishing division, with Ken doing the editing and me figuring out retail distribution and customer acquisitions and PR and marketing and all of those things. And I'd say that I failed miserably for about a year. But when you're learning something new, you're bound to fail more than you succeed. And I learned a lot, and I worked really hard. I impressed some fairly important people in the book publishing industry, namely a woman by the name of Miriam Bass. Miriam Bass is a legend in the book publishing industry. She was the first woman buyer at a retail chain. A buyer is someone who looks at a title and says, I'm going to carry 5 copies of this book at each of our stores, right? They make the determination on how many copies of the book to carry. But she was the first woman buyer for business books in the industry. But when I met her, she was the publisher rep for our distributor. Just a little bit of context. You've got author, you've got publisher, and you've got the retailers. Well, if you publish with the New York House, the top 10 publishers, they have sales reps that call directly from the publisher to the retailers when they make their sales presentations to bring in books. There are about 35,000 publishers in the industry. Last year alone, there were 8,000 business books published within about 250 different publishers. There's one buyer in that category, and that buyer is not going to be able to read every one of those books or even go through all of the sales presentations for all 250 books. And so they certainly give bias or preference towards the New York publishers, but the purpose of a distributor is to work with, NBN in this case works with 1,000 publishers or more, is to be able to act as a filtering system to find the diamonds in the rough, if you will, from all of their publishers and then present those to the buyer at the retailer. And so within NBN, you have 1,000 publishers. You don't have 1,000 publishers making presentations to 12 salespeople. Again, you have to have a mechanism in between where you've got one rep that represents maybe 30 or 40 or 50 publishers that then their objective is to find the diamonds in the rough of their group that then take it back to the sales reps. And so our sales rep was a woman by the name of Miriam Bass. And Miriam Bass was also the sales rep for a publisher out of Austin, Texas called Bard Press, B-A-R-D Press,
Mhm.
founded by Ray Bard. And Ray Bard is considered a legend in the world of business book publishing. He's published some of the biggest business books in the history of business books. And he is viewed as both understanding the market and the need of the market for business books, but also how to design customer experiences that create delight and ergo create word of mouth, right? And so a lot of the New York publishers copy what Ray Bard does. Well, Ray had just come off of a hit with a book titled Nuts, Southwest Airlines Crazy Recipe for Success. It was
Mhm.
written by Jackie and Kevin Freiberg, but it had the picture of Kelleher, the CEO of
Yeah, familiar.
Southwest Airlines at the time, with a tattoo of a nuts bag from the airlines on his shoulder, and so they had a huge success with that. And Ray was talking to Miriam and said, I really want to expand the business and do more big books like this. Do you know anybody that is good at marketing PR that could come in and help me do that? And so Miriam recommended this young, naive 19-year-old kid out of Provo, Utah. Ray interviewed me and he hired me. And the first day on the job, Ray said to me, Michael, we publish business authors. What our authors want more than anything else in the world is to be a New York Times best-selling author. What I want you to do is go figure out how the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and Business Week bestseller lists work. So that's exactly what I did. And as a young, naive 19-year-old, I did what most people wouldn't do, which was in not knowing any better, I literally called the New York Times editor and said, how do you compile your bestsellers list? I did it at the Wall Street Journal and USA Today and Business Week. And they all, to one degree or another, laughed at me, but said, hey, we really like your attitude, kid. Keep staying in touch with us. And so I did.
Yeah.
And the first book I worked on for Ray was a book titled Secret Formulas of the Wizard of Ads by Roy H. Williams, who's known as the Wizard of Ads. Roy owns the fourth largest ad agency in North America for buying radio.
Yeah.
And so,
Hey, Michael. Hey,
yeah, yes, sir.
hold on just a second. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Good stuff. All right, back talk with Michael Drew from promotabook.com and Book Retreat. So, Michael, you're on a roll. Keep on going. Talk with the New
Cool.
York
So,
Times and get this new book.
yeah, so the first book I worked on for Ray Bard was by Roy H. Williams, titled Secret Formulas of the Wizard of Ads. Roy currently owns the fourth, and back then, the fourth largest ad agency in North America for buying radio. And basically what had happened on his first book, The Wizard of Ads, is that he put like 10,000 sales through various retailers and didn't make the list. And so he relied on the information that I had gathered to be able to develop a strategy and execute a strategy to attempt to make the list again with secret formulas. Now, to be fair, I only had at the time with this first campaign a very small amount of the information. And so what we did was we actually overshot the list, which is fine. I mean, we did way better than we expected. But what we did is what I said is what we need to do is leverage your relationships with the radio stations, right? The radio stations are selling radio ads to customers. Roy is advocating that all small and medium-sized businesses should make radio their primary advertising vehicle, and he gives lots of arguments and logic and algorithms and all of that to be able to prove that out. And so what I said is what we need to do is create a training system for the sales reps at the radio stations to be able to give the book to potential customers as third-party validation and explanation as to why they need to buy radio, and train them on how to use the book as a sales tool to book more radio on their shows, on their stations. So of course, these stations, of course, are also always vying for the attention of Roy's clients for their media buys, and so of course they're going to pay more attention to Roy than they might pay attention to others. And so we did an advance mailing of the book to almost 1,000 general managers throughout the United States, and we had a really high conversion rate. We had over 860 stations that participated in our promotional campaign who bought 20 books and ran 200 radio ads
Wow.
during the launch of the book. And so by doing that, we were able to launch the book to #3 on the New York Times and #1 on the Wall Street Journal bestsellers list. We were just aiming for the bottom of the list. And I didn't have all the information. But based on the running of the first campaign, I learned a lot more about how the list worked. And so then worked on a book by Ivan Meisner titled Masters of Networking, and launched that to the New York Times and beyond, and used the first 5 years as a publisher and 19 books to be able to really refine the understanding of the list, so that when I left being a publisher, I went from Bard Press to being the publisher at Longstreet Press. I went from marketing director to publisher at Longstreet Press, because Longstreet Press actually acquired Bard Press. And then I went to Entrepreneur Magazine to be the publisher, or the co-publisher of their book division with Jerry Calmes, and worked there for years as the publisher, and then left. I got the entrepreneurial spirit again, left and started my own agency in book marketing. Now, the interesting thing that occurred in the first year as an entrepreneur that I didn't have an appreciation for as a publisher was that I put 7 books on the New York Times bestsellers list, and about half of my clients weren't happy with the results. Not because I didn't deliver exactly what I said, I did, but because what I failed to understand that as a publisher was their expectation of me was specifically publishing related, with bestseller as part of that publishing set of standards and works and expectations. But as a marketing company, their expectation was that the book would have an impact on their business. And so I was approaching it from an understanding of the industry exclusively, not worrying about the impact of the campaign on their business. So you can necessarily hit the standards to become a New York Times bestseller, but do it in a way that doesn't really have an impact or an immediate impact on your overall business. And so what that forced me to do was then become a student of platforms, how to build influencer and thought leadership platforms. And when you become a student of that, then you can figure out when and where a book and a book promotion fits into building that platform.
Wow. So a lot of these people you're working with, the reason they were writing a book was becoming an authority in that space to trigger more business towards their actual business, where their business wasn't really writing books. They wrote the book to promote their business.
Yeah, that's true for all of my clients. Even looking back and talking to my clients from Bard Press, all of them were using the book in the capacity of promoting their business.
Okay. So even getting it to so there was a conversion that needed to take place from being on the #1 New York Times bestseller list or the Wall Street Journals to, oh, I'm going to go do business with the guy that wrote the book.
Yeah, so what happens is there are standards at the New York Times and other lists, right? So sales, and they're not real lists, right? They're not compiling real sales in real time. So it's not just, oh, you have enough sales. You have to have enough distribution and sales, and they do track the amount of online and traditional media that you're getting. And if you don't hit certain levels of that, then they don't believe the sales. And so when you're looking at hitting all of those standards, it's like, cool, let's say I need 20,000 pre-sales of the print book. Well, how am I selling the book to my customer, to my existing customer base in a way that not only meets the fact that I need 20,000 sales, but also gets them further engaged with me so that they're buying products or services or attending events or whatever else? How are we getting them to engage with us more? So as an example with Roy, the fact that the radio stations wanted his client's business, they got involved in the promotion of the book because they wanted that connection. And they in turn were willing to promote Roy as the expert, which expanded his reach and his audience, which allowed him to bring more clients back to them. So it was something that worked for for Roy and for his customers. But at the end of the day, the art of a bestseller launch is figuring out how to meet the science, the technical aspects of the campaign, while having that directly, literally tied into the promotion of the business.
And how did you end up doing that? Like at some point, you were able to work with a client before they've even written their book, and so you can, if you can
That is
get it
ideal.
before they write the book, now you can guide them and direct them through. Don't write
That's
a book on this. You should really write it on that.
Absolutely. That is the idea. About two-thirds of our clients still come to us having a publisher and having written the book. And so that often can make it a little bit more difficult. The less connected the book is to the business outcome, the lower the conversions, the harder it is to be able to make that transition. We still work on figuring it out and putting together campaigns to be able to do that, but it's a lot more work to do that. Whereas if you know that my business outcome is X and my customer's outcome is Y, well, let's design the book to meet both the business outcome and the customer outcome so that we can make it work together.
Interesting. Yeah. So so I do want to ask, how do if somebody's interested in promoting a book or writing a book with your help, how do they go about doing that?
So we have a couple of different ways to work with somebody. If you want to write a book, bookretreat.com, BOOKREAT.com, bookretreat.com is where I'd recommend going. We offer twice a year book writing retreats in Guatemala. They're a month long each, or you can come for the first week. And then we also offer ghostwriting and other writing services on the site. If somebody has an existing platform, they have the audience and the budget and platform, and they want to run a bestseller campaign. Certainly, we have information on that website, but promotabook.com is where we talk more about the bestseller. There are bestseller campaigns. There are three bestseller campaigns, so your audience is where that we run. One is the Success Magazine bestseller. This is for personal development and business authors only. They have 7 business lists. One is a personal development list. USA Today is a top 150 list, which includes fiction, nonfiction, paperback, and hardcover, and children's all on one list. So it's a top 150 list. And then the New York Times. The standards for each of those lists are different. The success list is, because they have 7 lists, is actually the easiest list to make if you're published in personal development or in business. Then USA Today, and then the New York Times has a slew of standards beyond sales. So it's a much more difficult campaign, as I've been describing, for folks to make.
So if you're talking to a novice that hasn't written a book yet, and they're struggling with, like, many years ago, I interviewed a Navy SEAL who was saying, like, yeah, he would learn from his publishers, like, don't write a book about your memoirs. Like, that's not going to sell. Like, and he was like, and I think he was the guy that ended up writing the book, 101 Deadly Skills to Know, like a list book or something substantive. He had an interesting perspective on how to go about writing books. You need to strategize before you write a book about, well, what kind of books sell better and that kind of thing. So what are your thoughts on that?
So a couple of things. Most marketers are tacticians, right? A book is a tactic. It's not a strategy,
Huh.
and it's not an outcome. The first thing that you define is the outcome. The next thing you define is how you measure the outcome. So you could say the outcome is, I want to reach 1 million people and get them to tell a story of living a life of significance. When I worked with John Maxwell on a book, that's how we defined what success was. Well, then we had to measure it. You and I can tell stories all day long, but if John Maxwell can't see that and measure that, there's no way for him to know that he's accomplished that. So it's not sufficient just to state the outcome, but you have to have a measurement metric to be able to know that you've accomplished that, because that measurement metric then dictates the strategy. And the strategy then dictates the tactic. So the strategy that we developed then was, cool, we need a way to get people to tell and share stories online. So what we did then is we said, cool, let's develop a leadership assessment that applies both John Maxwell's leadership model and Myers-Briggs, the psychographic tool, together so that we could then come up with 4 different audience segments based on leadership standards and Myers-Briggs temperament qualities, so that we could then communicate to each of those 4 quadrants in the language of what's important to them. And so we did that, and then we moved them over into a 7-day challenge with John, which was 7 days of, and it was tailored, by the way, for each of the different 4 temperament types. Every day was different for each of the 4 temperament types, or result types. And we had a free 7-day challenge. So one of the things that we know that is true today is that inspiration by itself is insufficient. Trust is built through the ability to deliver results. So what we did is we gave them 7 days of small daily actions where they would go, say, buy coffee for somebody in the line behind them, and then they would come back on and share their experience within the system, so that they would have the oxytocin release from being out in the community, and the dopamine reminder when they went back and typed in the response. And then, oh, by the way, we're now capturing stories of actions of significance that goes against that million number. So we went into that. There was a free offering. And then at the end of that, we said, hey, now that you've seen the benefits of doing this every day for a week, why don't you turn this into a lifetime habit and set of rituals so that you're always living a life of significance? Do a 30-day journey with John, which was the exact same type of content that was in the 7-day, only spread out over the course of a month, to be able to turn that into habits and rituals. And so by knowing the outcome and the measurement, we set the strategy, and then the tactics all followed what that strategy was. So before anything else, the first thing you want to define is what is your outcome. Then you want to define what your measurement is. Then you want to define the strategy. Then you want to define the tactics. When you define what your outcomes are and you move into strategy, part of strategy is defining who your customer is. We use a process called buyer personas. Other people call them avatars. Avatars are really a cheap imitation of buyer personas, which was a process developed by Brian Jeffrey Eisenberg. But we create buyer personas that, again, represent different segmentations of the audience, so that we can map out on a buyer persona by buyer persona basis what those customer journeys are, so that we can create alignment between the author's objective, the business owner's objective, and the customer. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to make sure, like, your story is only important insofar as it benefits somebody else, right? Your audience, there has to be something in it for them. So we have to create that alignment with that. So we create those buyer personas, and then let the combination of the buyer personas and business owners' outcomes and measurement dictate the strategy and the tactics.
Wow. Okay. So if you're talking to somebody kind of at the beginning of the journey with their goal to write their book, what kind of advice
Number one,
you have to get
set your
started?
outcome.
Uh-huh.
Set your outcome. Number two, set your measurement. Measurement metric. How are you going to measure that you're doing that? So we say, oh, I want to change the role. Okay, what does that mean? Oh, I want to see 1 million people become entrepreneurs and start a business and make $1 million. Okay, well that's really complex, right? That's a very complex metric. How are you measuring that they've started a business and then they've gone from 0 to 1 million? Like that requires something much more complex than what John wanted, which was telling a story. So you define that, and then you define who the customer is. Like, really sit down and work to define who the customer is and what they want. And what I want to point out to your audience is, building a relationship in a non-intimate environment is the same as building a relationship in an intimate environment. Why is that important? What you and I are doing right now is an intimate conversation. It may not be in person, but you can see me and I can see you, and we can change and adjust our postures and how we hold ourselves and our speed of speech and what we're doing based on the other party. And we do that normally, unconsciously or subconsciously. It's just a normal thing that we do. Well, that's what happens in an intimate environment. But your customer's physiology and psychology doesn't change when you go from intimate to non-intimate. All marketing and all advertising are done in non-intimate environments,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even the audience watching this podcast, they're experiencing this content in a non-intimate environment. Now, the benefit of something like a podcast or a vlog is that you and I can have the intimate conversation, and the mere neurons of the audience can fire to a degree to emulate intimacy. It's still not intimacy, but it's an emulation of intimacy. So it's a little more connected than reading a blog on a website, or watching a static video, or any of those things, right?
Mhm.
And so the objective then is to be able to map out the customer journey, looking at what you would do with that individual in the real world, one-on-one, and making sure that you're consciously doing the things that you unconsciously do in an intimate environment, but making sure that you're doing them in an intimate environment.
Nice. Wow. So, yeah, you definitely know the book business inside and out. That's the most insightful um, 30 minutes I've ever heard on, the ins and outs of writing a book and promoting it and selling it and everything else. So that's incredible. Anyways, I appreciate you sharing all that. So, give you the last word. Let's say, usually I say, hey, if somebody's interested in starting a business, what kind of advice they have for them. But let's make a little twist on that. If somebody's looking to get into writing a book, what kind of advice comes to mind?
Let me give you some advice that applies to life, publishing, and business. My mentor, my first bestselling author, was Roy H. Williams. And about 20 years ago now, it's been that long, we were walking the streets of New York after Book Expo America. It was the biggest book industry trade convention in the world. They stopped it a few years ago. But we were walking the streets of New York, and I was 25, 26. And Roy said to me, Michael, the winners and losers in life are determined when the teams are picked. There are two teams that are essential for your success. The first are the team of people who select you to be on their team. The second are those you select to be on your team. So my advice is, make sure, if you haven't been picked by the right people, to go position yourself to be picked to be on the right people's teams. And secondarily, make sure that you're putting the right people on your team that will help you accomplish your success.
No better way to end it there. All right, Michael. Yeah, thanks for sharing your entrepreneurial success story. I mean, all the way back to when you were a kid. It's quite the journey and quite the success story. So appreciate you sharing that. So, yeah, good stuff, man. All right, thanks, and we're out of time, so we're Oscar Mike.
Thank you.